It's Friday, May 27th, 2022. I'm Jackson Bird. Today, why viruses are starting to act in unexpected ways. Plus, the Sex Pistols re-release God Save the Queen just in time for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. And at least one DIY collective is running an anti-jubilee punk festival. And some follow-ups to previous stories, including those ABBA-tar holograms. Here's some cool stuff for your ride home. So on Monday, I discussed monkeypox and all the reasons you almost certainly do not need to freak out about it, despite the fact that, yes, technically it is currently spreading in an atypical fashion. 3 quick takeaways in case you missed it. Death from monkeypox is extremely rare. It is not very transmissible, and we have ample means to treat and prevent it since it's been around since the 1950s. And the fact that it's returned in a slightly different way than before and is causing outbreaks in places that rarely see it also shouldn't be too surprising, even if we don't have an exact explanation yet. That's because lots of viruses that haven't been seen in a while, or at least took a little vacation during COVID, have now peeked their heads back in the room, and many of them are behaving in unexpected ways. Helen Branswell, the senior writer on infectious disease for Stat News, covered this curious situation earlier this week. And when you put the pieces together, none of it is entirely surprising. I've talked a few times about how mild of flu seasons we've had the past 2 years, caused at least in part by precautions being taken to prevent COVID, like masking, distancing, isolating, and paying attention to ventilation, being beneficial to preventing the spread of all respiratory illnesses. But, as we sort of knew would happen, all that isolating and distancing, traveling less, perhaps going to school and work less, also means we have less recently acquired immunity to other illnesses. So, Branswell points out that while we had mild flu seasons for the last 2 years, we have just started to see flu hospitalizations pick up. Like, just now, in May. Hardly the time you usually think of for flu season. And then RSV, usually a bug caught in the winter, saw huge outbreaks in kids over the past summer and early fall. And there's the curious case of adenovirus type 41, which used to cause just mild gastrointestinal illness, but is now thought to be triggering severe hepatitis in otherwise healthy kids. So what's up? As Branwell puts it, quote, "The viruses are not different than they were before, but we are." End quote. We're different because of that lowered recent immunity, making us more susceptible to illness writ large, but also causing us to sometimes have unexpected symptoms, or for viruses to spread at different times of the year or places in the world than usual. Marion Koopman of the Erasmus Medical Center in the Netherlands told Stat that we could be facing a period of time in which it will be difficult to know what to expect, even from diseases we thought we understood. What some scientists say is that some of these symptoms or other diseases being triggered by viruses were perhaps always there as a potential outcome, but we didn't pick up on it before because the case numbers were so low. Kevin Messakar, a pediatric infectious diseases specialist at Children's Hospital Colorado, told Stat regarding the outbreak of hepatitis seemingly from adenovirus type 41, quote, "I think sometimes to connect the dots of rare complications of common illnesses, you just need enough cases out there to start to put the pieces together. And there is some suspicion that that could be going on with the hepatitis cases." End quote. And you may have picked up that several of Branswell's examples are particularly affecting young kids. That's because usually kids play an outsized role in spreading illness. But again, usually, quoting Stat, "Little kids are normally germ magnets and germ amplifiers, but their lives were profoundly altered during the pandemic. Most went for stretches of time without attending daycare or in-person school. Many had far less exposure to people outside their households, and when they did encounter others, those people may have been wearing masks. And babies born during the pandemic may have entered the world with few antibodies passed on by their mothers in the womb because those mothers may have been sheltered from RSV and other respiratory pathogens during their pregnancies," said Hubert Niesters, a professor of clinical virology and molecular diagnostics at the University Medical Center in the Netherlands. End quote. And of course, with young kids, there's the other complicating factor that many of them missed out on crucial childhood vaccinations during the pandemic. This is due in part to the ballooning anti-vax movement, but also due to many healthcare facilities having to allocate resources towards COVID-19, as well as people's hesitancy to go to healthcare centers due to COVID-19 transmission and, in some places around the world, strict lockdowns. Experts are therefore monitoring a number of viruses which have the potential to cause serious illness in young children when they come back. One is Enterovirus D68, which is thought to sometimes cause a polio-like condition called acute flaccid myelitis, or AFM. Since 2014, it's had biennial waves in the US in the late summer and early autumn, but there was no wave in 2020. Or 2021. At some point, it will return, and as Messakar says, quote, "Now we have 4 years of children who haven't seen that virus. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know when it comes back. But when it does come back, there are more susceptible children out there that would not be expected to have immunity." End quote. And Koopman adds that her team conducted a study indicating kids in the second year of the pandemic had far less antibodies to common respiratory viruses due to less exposure. And while this is the same basic reason that we're seeing a rise in flu cases and other viruses among adults, it can be particularly concerning that these young kids are lacking in antibodies because a lot of these illnesses are ones in which, A, the rest of us have antibodies for since we weren't infants during the social distancing periods of the pandemic, and B, are much more gnarly the older you get. A 4-year-old getting one of these viruses could have more severe outcomes than a 6-month-old, for example. But when it comes to adults, there is one final reason we're starting to see some viruses return with a vengeance. The relaxing of COVID-19 measures isn't just causing a surge in COVID cases, but a commensurate surge in all other contagious illnesses. With so many people overjoyed to finally be back out traveling, partying, or whatever, and throwing many cautions to the wind, they're perhaps taking part in even riskier activities than prior to the pandemic, and now with less acquired immunity to various illnesses than before. It's a rotten combination. And while there's a little uncertainty about unexpected symptoms or other diseases that could be triggered by viruses, especially in young children, overall, we do not need to panic. We're not looking at some other pandemic or an unending future of more extreme illness, just possibly a few seasons of more intense versions of existing viruses. Peter Broden, a professor of pediatric immunology at Imperial College London, says it's not a doomsday prediction and that things will eventually quiet down. So follow the same precautions based on your and your household's risk profile that you have been throughout the pandemic. Stay informed and monitor the spread of illness in your area or those you're planning to visit. I've been really heartened to see some signs in public places changing the wording on guidance about masking, distancing, hand washing, etc. from "to prevent the spread of COVID-19" to prevent the spread of respiratory illnesses. Because, well, one, it's sadly maybe less inflammatory for them to phrase it that way, but two, it's the truth. Basically, every measure we've enacted over the last few years are things we should always do to prevent the spread of all kinds of illnesses, and to a certain extent, we should keep it up. "45 years ago today, English punk rock band the Sex Pistols released their second single, God Save the Queen. Despite both the BBC and the Independent Broadcasting Authority banning the song, it still managed to reach number 1 on the NME charts and number 2 on the official UK singles charts. Titled the same as the UK's national anthem, God Save the Queen was controversial for calling the monarchy a fascist regime, and lines like, "God save the Queen, she ain't no human being, there's no future in England's dreaming," and "God saves no future for you." Frontman John Lydon, aka Johnny Rotten, has repeatedly said that he meant it more of a critique of how the monarchy was being run, and not at all a personal dig at Queen Elizabeth II, and not even necessarily against the monarchy, saying once that if they were gonna have a monarchy, it might as well serve the people well. More than anything, he says the song was meant to be a working-class anthem. Lydon's a bit of a loose cannon, though, so I tend to take anything he says, particularly revisionist history, with a grain of salt. Whatever their intentions were, the Sex Pistols certainly stirred the pot. They struggled to get booked for shows anywhere, shops refused to sell the album, some places even blanked out their names in the reporting of the song charts, and the band members and producers themselves faced a number of physical altercations from people upset about the song. And while the BBC originally banned the song when it debuted in 1977, it's since come around to the track and perhaps its place in the history of punk rock and English politics. Back in 2016, not long after the Brexit referendum, a Conservative Member of Parliament, Andrew Rosendale, filed a motion that the public service broadcaster return to their previous practice of playing the national anthem at the end of the day's programming, something the BBC had stopped doing in 1997. In response to this, BBC Newsnight ended their next show with presenter Kirsty Wark saying, quote, "Well, we're not BBC One, and it's not quite the end of the day, but we're incredibly happy to oblige. Good night." And then they cut to the music video for the Sex Pistols version of God Save the Queen, illustrating both how mainstream the originally controversial song has become over the years, but also the power it still retains as an anti-establishment anthem. The song is back in the headlines for a few reasons today. It's the 45th anniversary of its release, yes, but that original release back in 1977 also shared space with the height of the Silver Jubilee celebrations. The Silver Jubilee marked 25 years since Queen Elizabeth II had been coronated, jubilees being a traditional celebration on the anniversary of certain milestones for monarchs in the United Kingdom. Silver marking 25 years, golden marking 50. Queen Victoria was the first to have a diamond jubilee for her 60th anniversary, and Queen Elizabeth II was the first to have both a sapphire for her 65th and, coming up next weekend, a platinum jubilee for her 70th anniversary. Now, many critics and fans believed that the Sex Pistols' timing for the release of God Save the Queen was a direct commentary on the pomp, circumstance, and expense of the 1977 Silver Jubilee. But drummer and co-songwriter Paul Cook insists they didn't even connect the dots. It was not intentionally written or released to comment on the Jubilee. Although the band did go on to try to perform the song on a boat on the Thames during Jubilee celebrations and were subsequently arrested. And the assumption has nonetheless stuck through the decades, with the record company re-releasing the song on the anniversary of both Queen Elizabeth's Golden and Diamond Jubilees. And now, they've just announced another re-release is happening for the Platinum Jubilee. 4,000 vinyl copies of the 1977 Virgin Records recording will be released, along with 1,977 vinyl copies of the rare A&M Records version, with some earlier B-side recordings. Quoting the BBC, "The A&M version was deleted in 1977, when the label split with the band over their obnoxious behavior. About 25,000 copies of the single were destroyed, and the rare remaining copies now sell for up to about £16,000. End quote. Following, at least in the interpreted spirit of the original single, 3 pubs across Bristol will be holding a 3-day punk festival coinciding with the days of the official Jubilee, which they are billing as an F the Jubilee Festival. Officially called the Easton Punk Festival and organized by the DIY Bristol Scum Collective, the event will feature about 20 punk bands and cost £5 per night. One of the festival's posters appropriately replaces Queen Elizabeth's portrait in the famous God Save the Queen Sex Pistols album art rendering with Prince Andrew, emphasizing some of the more obvious complaints a lot of people have with the monarchy at the moment. And if you're looking to get into that spirit ahead of the Jubilee or just learn more about the punk movement in the 70s, FX on Hulu will be premiering their new Pistol miniseries on May 31st, telling the story of the Sex Pistols through the perspective of guitarist Steve Jones, whose memoir the series is based on. Directed by Trainspotting's Danny Boyle and featuring Maisie Williams and Thomas Brodie Sanger alongside a cast of otherwise mostly younger unknowns, the series has gotten a lukewarm reception by critics but is still being praised for being ridiculously watchable. I will also throw out a strong recommendation for the book Lipstick Traces: A Secret History of the 20th Century by music critic Greil Marcus, which tells the story of various avant-garde movements like Situationist International and Dadaism, kind of through the lens of the Sex Pistols and the broader punk movement. It is a wild, genre-defying book, but definitely worth the read. I mean, not many non-fiction books can say they've been turned into plays or had their own soundtracks produced by record companies. But in any case, I guess, God save the Queen, man. Well, a few follow-ups to stories I've covered previously. ABBA has officially begun their residency at the new ABBA Arena in Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in London. You may remember that while this was technically their first concert in 42 years, and the first time all 4 band members were seen in public together in 36 years, they weren't actually physically performing. Last year, the band recorded all of the performances for their new album and some classic hits, while Industrial Light and Magic turned them into holograms that look like their younger selves performing in their prime. Or, as at least one band member referred to them, ABBA-tars. And honestly, at least from the poor resolution of an Instagram video, these ABBA-tars look pretty much like the real thing. I mean, definitely more human than hologram. So, well done, Industrial Light and Magic. Also, a while back I told you about a middle school class that proposed a measure to the Massachusetts Senate for a victim of the Salem witch trials to be pardoned. Elizabeth Johnson Jr., who was convicted of witchcraft in 1693 and sentenced to execution, but never ended up being executed, was the last person whose name had not been cleared in the 329 years since. And yesterday, the state Senate officially signed off on the measure, clearing her name. The largely symbolic move was also an educational experience for the 8th graders on researching, civics, and advocating for people who can't always advocate for themselves, said teacher Carrie LaPierre. And finally, Taco Bell's Mexican Pizza the Musical, featuring Dolly Parton with an assist from Doja Cat and viral TikToker Victor Kunda, has been postponed. It was supposed to debut exclusively on TikTok yesterday, the 26th, but the restaurant chain tweeted out that it has been postponed and will be rescheduled. It's unclear exactly why, but at least one article implies that Taco Bell thought it would be off-color to premiere a goofy, happy musical in light of the tragedies this week, which, fair. Netflix also realized, albeit several hours too late, that the events of this week might require an extra content warning on the just-dropped new season of Stranger Things. Link in the show notes for more on that. A number of movies and TV shows have either postponed releases or scaled back promotion this week, particularly those featuring violence against children. And, wow, I don't really want to end the show on that note, so just go watch the ABBA holograms to clear your head. It's been a rough week, so I hope you all get a chance to unplug for a bit this weekend, get some fresh air, hug a friend or loved one, and get a moment to see some of the light in the darkness. I will be back on Monday.